Hi everybody. So we're going to get started right away. We have a lot of great videos for you to show you of strange objects in the sky that are performing these characteristics such as EMF, morphing effects, extreme speed, and almost flight characteristics, objects on the moon, and impossible changes of direction. So we're going to get started right away. Ben's going to narrate, and I'm going to control the slides over here. And hopefully we'll have time for questions, but if not, you can catch us afterwards.
Greetings. So these videos we're going to show, we did as much homework as we could to only present what we believe are really anomalous objects. Remember one of the earlier speakers said he'd only seen a couple of good videos. You're going to see some fascinating videos here, and at the end we're going to talk about the physics of what we're seeing.
This is a local case in Maryland, so we've got Pullman Road this year.
Apparently Maryland's had a lot of sightings lately.
This is the photograph on that side. So if anyone's heard of this case, or like more about communities.
It's interesting because there was a case, I think it was in Maryland years ago, where somebody at 3 a.m. in the morning saw a jet plane chasing a blue object, just like that picture. That's the location. So Nellis is a pretty famous sighting. We're showing this again simply because of the morphing effect. These craft that we think are not human use some type of propulsion which, sometimes doesn't give you the true shape of the object. There's a field around most of these anomalous videos that look real. Most of any craft that we have, I don't know, it generates a field around it, whether it's plasma or some type of static shell that negates gravity. But this object has no discernible shape, as you'll see.
Look at the readout in the upper right-hand corner. It says the object being tracked is over 10,000 meters away. That's about 6.5 miles. Whatever it is, it's solid and large enough to spike the radar return. A second video from Nellis Air Force Base. This time the target moves slowly above the horizon. Once again, radar operators have no clue what they're looking at. We asked Chuck DeCaro, a nationally recognized expert on military technology, to take a look at the tapes.
There are many possibilities here. If you can eliminate all the possibilities, then you come up with some technology that is unknown.
Any more fine?
That would be a very good goal.
Good find.
Hard copy had one of the air.
So that basically, as the thing turns and rotates, you get no idea what shape it is. This one is very interesting. This gentleman was filming just a tourist film and didn't realize what he captured until afterwards. Hopefully you can see this, but we do zoom in. This is the zoom in. This is a cylindrical object going through the clouds, taking sharp turns, and the estimated speed is 1,100 miles per hour. It goes so fast, it pulls a little bit of the cloud, a little bit of the vapor with it, but that's the real speed. It's just a blink of the eye. So you can see it's kind of turning, and it has a field around it. A lot of these craft, when we look at them, they do produce some type of field, which obviously they don't need to fly, perpendicular. They can fly in any direction, in any angle, because they're not aerodynamic. They don't need to be aerodynamic.
We're not sure that's the actual shape of it. It's going so fast sometimes it stretch out.
Yeah.
So it can actually be a little bit short.
Do you see the field? There's some type of field around the object, which typically our aircraft don't produce that.
It's the reflection of sunlight right there.
The moon UAPs are interesting because a lot of astronomers, amateur astronomers are capturing this. I don't know why we're not seeing it from major astronomers, but probably because they fear that it might jeopardize their jobs. Still the stigma about that. But the moon, if you ever looked at the moon through a telescope, moves pretty quickly. So this guy just zeroes in on an edge, and you'll see 3 objects come across the face of the moon casting shadows with no obvious propulsion. There they are right at the bottom. There's 2, and there's a third one below it. You see the shadow. They look ellipsoid in shape, but no obvious means of propulsion. and they're in front of the moon, really close to the moon. Unless they're ours, there's some strange things flying around the moon. And they would have to be quite large, I would imagine. There's one at the bottom. It's an ellipsoid shape, but you never can tell how light and shadow is going to work, depending on the angle of the sun. Here's another one that moves across really fast and creates a huge shadow on the moon. You see it go from left to right. That's normal speed, so it's got to be traveling really fast. That's how fast it goes by. But obviously fairly close to the surface. But the shape of the object itself is moving so fast, you really, if these things are producing a plasma field around it, the shape might be whatever the plasma field is, not the craft itself.
You can see it right there. Basically,
This one pops out of a crater, it looks like, at the top of the screen. We've gone back and forth on this video. It seems to be genuine. Not sure if it comes out of the crater or just comes out of the shadow, but moving at incredible speed. So here's some videos of who knows what. These objects do have these black lines, and that seems to be that typical field that you'll see around it that won't be produced by birds or drones or things of that nature. And this is from, I think, 2000. And I don't think birds would actually move like that. They usually stay in this pattern so they don't run into each other. But definitely some type of strange environmental effect around the object. So you really don't see the true shape. You're just seeing whatever the propulsion is producing. This is from a nuclear power plant of an object. Looks like it lands. And it seems to be rotating a bit.
That bright light seems to move around. Right about there.
Fairly shaky video, but interesting, and it flashes only at the bottom. It doesn't flash like, the normal lights you need on a conventional aircraft or a drone. I believe this is a little bit pre-drone. Could have been the 90s. Sometimes we find footage, and then when you go back to find it, you don't have permission to look at it anymore, which is very interesting. Yeah, then it just books off. It looks like it moves to the left, which will show extreme acceleration later, which kind of rules out, man-made craft. This is interesting. This object seems to be following this commercial aircraft. Again, no form of propulsion visible. Certainly flying too close to an airplane to be one of ours, or they would have vectored this guy away from it. But not even sure they showed up on radar. A lot of these objects don't. You can see the field around it, it's kind of pulsing. When we try to guess as to what they're using, anti-gravity or magnetohydrodynamics, it's all guesses until we get one of these things to investigate, see how it runs. But these are definitely displays of what seems to be beyond human capabilities. And I doubt if we'd be flying any top secret aircraft near commercial airliners. Yeah, the second angle will show this thing accelerate. See? Blew right by it. We couldn't find out if the pilot saw this, but as a quick aside, when Tony and I flew to the last MUFON conference in Vegas, we let the pilot know that through the stewardess that we were UFO investigators. And after we were in the air, he goes, I asked her to have him tell us if he sees anything. And she came back and said, do you mean like the two that just passed on the left? Unfortunately, we were sitting on the right-hand side. Yeah. So this is a live feed from NASA, so pretty real video of an object that does something very strange. You'll see it come in on the right.
This was the last live feed, I think, right?
Yeah, they usually cut it off after something strange happens. And then you can't find it. So these are all recorded by people that record all the NASA feeds. See, it moves, and then it'll make a dog turn. See that? I don't know if Chinese satellites, I know they have capabilities, but I don't know if they can do a move like that. And then it goes. Almost like it saw something.
Following like that cloud trail too, doesn't it? See that light?
Yeah, it's almost like it noticed something and decided to back up and go along a different path.
I mean, that's gotta be broken.
Yeah, the speed is almost uncalculable. Here's, once again, UFOs don't seem to need to fly at an angle that is aerodynamic. They can fly straight against the atmosphere because we don't think they're pushing the atmosphere. They're shooting some type of either plasma beam or something ahead of them that opens that up.
At that second, the object was passing straight over.
Once again, there's a field around. This reminds me of the UFOs seen in Mexico in the 90s during the eclipse. Kind of silverish with a purple haze around it.
As it flies over my house, it suddenly does a U-turn and then jumped about 1.5 miles in like a matter of half a second to where I couldn't even see it anymore. So I started scanning the sky for it. Finally, about a minute and a half later, I caught it.
How many times have we heard of this randomly out of a coin?
Yeah.
But it seems that it was still on its side.
We'll show a little evidence later of why they may, how they may push the air out in front of them.
Metallic machine that is running under its own type of propulsion system. It's running under something that we can only dream about.
This is a rather large object that seems to come down in a forest in Colombia. And it's a good distance away, so I don't think it's a balloon. I doubt if it's a drone because of its size. And it's in the middle of nowhere. There's not a whole lot of anomalous activity here, but it is very strange. You'll see when it comes into the tree line that it brightens up, and you get a little bit of an idea of the shape. Yeah, see, right there.
I feel this is 100. This is what we have been asking. I'm missing this. They're so amazed by it. And just by it going down, you can see it go down behind the trees. I mean, this is what we have been asking for. Now I feel this is 100% legit, and I feel this is CGI. I really like this footage, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, it becomes white.
I'm going to show you this thing landing again, and make of it what you will. So, please, hope you guys enjoy it.
It's kind of strange, landing in the middle of nowhere, doesn't look like a blimp. No obvious means of propulsion again.
So, please be safe, stay blessed.
Here's another example of the surrounding either electromagnetic field or whatever is a factor of the propulsion that these are using. So you really can't get an idea of the shape, but there's definitely a strong field around here. And this was pointed out in a lot of the UAP videos that the government's released that they've analyzed when they suddenly goes, hey, there seems to be a field around that. Well, we knew this from a long time ago. And I'm of the firm belief that these things are flying around a lot. They're moving at such high speed that we don't catch most of them. We'll show an example at the end of what a high-speed camera can capture. But if they're able to move at just about any speed, they could be 10 feet over our head and we would never know it. These are examples of extreme acceleration. This thing will seem to go through a portal and pop up on the right. It'll start to disappear and then it pops up on the right. Another tourist video, and then kind of books off.
See going into some kind of something.
And then pops up.
Disappears on one side, appears down the left. And we've seen several cases like this from all over the country. And America just have, this is the best video on it.
Yeah, it's one of the few where it actually seems to go through like a hole, whereas a lot of them that look like they disappear are just accelerating at incredible speed.
As soon as it disappears to the left, it appears on the right. That's right there. See it? On the right.
Yeah.
So there's the 2 points right there. Disappear, reappear. Disappear, reappear.
We have a couple of drone captures that seem to catch something that's not moving at the speed of a bird or a drone. You won't even be able to tell the shape of this thing because of the speed. Upper left, it'll go across the screen.
It's in a real slow motion.
There it is. And even in slow motion, you have no idea what that shape is. It almost looks like two things stacked on top of each other.
I'll stop it right here. Right there. It almost looks like a cylinder shape that's going so fast you can't really tell.
And to stretch out like that, I mean, you can watch a missile launch, you can still see the missile. It doesn't really stretch out. This extreme acceleration just gives you an idea that it's moving way beyond maybe even supersonic speed, but never seems to create any type of, sound barrier break. This is one of the most famous videos from Gulf Breeze, but this is really good at capturing extreme acceleration. And this again reminds me of
UFO hotspot, Gulf Breeze, Florida, 1993.
this is self-explanatory.
This rare UFO video sequence was shot by alleged alien contactee Ed Walters. After panning the entire horizon, a small disc-shaped object appeared overhead, where just before there had been nothing. Then it suddenly disappeared. Could this be a true alien encounter? Or the product of an elaborate hoax?
I know Ed's equipment, which is basically about the simplest type of equipment you could get, that rules out the technical capability to do something sophisticated. I don't believe it was a hoax.
Researcher Bob Exler found other supportive evidence in Walters' video by comparing sunlight angles, shadows of buildings, and the object's incredible acceleration.
Most remarkable videotape, one that I could not see any way that could be artificially manufactured.
While the merits of Walters Beach UFO video continue to be debated, one thing is clear. There is a person walking in a boat in the frame the moment the UFO disappears, making it difficult to fabricate. And this is not the only UFO video that Walters, who has claimed physical sensations signal the UFO is nearby, has shown investigators to prove he's been a magnet for sightings. In 1987, Walters, who lived close to sensitive military bases, brought these startling photos to the town newspaper. Then he went public with this extraordinary nighttime UFO video showing the same bizarre craft. Top Walters case expert Bruce McAbee remains baffled.
But it wasn't until I spent a considerable amount of time analyzing it that I realized just how impressive it was. Shape, structure, and the way it moved is not a characteristic of any craft that human beings make.
Even these UFOs, attributed to a mysterious man named Martin Allen, might have actually been shot by Walters, who researchers say
This is
out
incredible acceleration.
Watch this accelerating UFO, which in slow motion doesn't look like a missile or known craft. Nor does this, which moves like the one in Walters Beach video. Here's a similar one in the third clip. It shows the craft becoming a silver streak, zooming away.
Now the next one is some analysis of this acceleration.
This Philip video was taken in 1993, towards the end. If we zoom in on this thing, I'm zoomed in 400%. This is Adobe Premiere Pro. And now if I go through this frame by frame, you see it zoom out. Watch it here. Boom, there it goes. It's almost like a liquid, how it does it, right? So we see here you have it's like one spear, from what we can tell, the sun coming from this direction, and then it seems like there's another object here, something else that is a dark point, right? Which doesn't really make sense because the light is coming from this direction. So that's interesting to me. And then when it goes, you'll see it almost changes shape. Okay, so it's changing shape here, and then it like liquefies and just pieces out. You can track it as it goes along here. There it is.
Yeah. I don't know if it changes shape, but anything moving that fast is gonna look like it changes shape.
So that looks like, again, those little orbs, similar to what Dave Falch videoed in IR, only IR, actually it didn't work in optical, only IR, from Jacksonville, called Jacksonville UFO. And also similar to what Nigel Benton from the UK, he's filmed twice now in the same location, a similar bright star, bright light, if you will. This came from an hands across with a video camera, and he has a separate photograph that they both captured the same object. And it looks like that bright white square, he said, a square-shaped object, or circular. Again, very similar to the orbs that we've seen off the East Coast and even the West Coast. One other interesting photographic point I wanted to bring out of the whole pile of evidence from Gulf Breeze was Ed Walters' 2 photos that he took with an F-15 and a UFO in the same frame. So this is the first photo. We actually took 2 photos. This is January 12, 1994 by Ed Walters. So this is the first photo. What you see here is coming into the frame is an aircraft. And then what we have here is the UFO. And this is similar to what it looks just like the model that was found, right, in his attic supposedly later. It shows up kind of clear there. That's the first photo, and he says, note sun angle here. Okay, so we go to the second photo, and this one's quite interesting to me. It looks like an F-15 to me, or an F-4, really, because F-4, they have their intakes on the left and right here, just like an F-15, and then they have, it's this painted front that makes it look like an F-40. But I think based on the wingtips and the tail, it's an F-15. So what we saw as I thought is this the Tic Tac? I think this is what could possibly be the Tic Tac. First, really good video evidence. Okay, so let's watch through this. This was filmed by Ed Walters before the Philip video. See that? Sure looks like a Tic Tac, doesn't it? Right there, look how fast that thing is. Okay, so you have to go frame by frame here, you just see it enter. Okay? Woo! And that looks like a Tic Tac. Sure looks like to me. Okay, and then he goes past here. What I noticed is, you notice the line here, the angle. Okay, angle of flight, angle of travel, and then it will slightly change. So I think it turns, I think the object actually turns right around here. Okay, and then departs at this angle. You see? So I backed it up. There's your first angle, is like that. So I think right here you have a turn. The object actually turns, which would just be amazing acceleration. Ed also took another video of a helicopter, just so you can see from the same position. So you hear that. I overlaid both. Boom. There's the heel. Look how fast that thing's traveling. This is just an opacity layer. Okay, you see I can remove it. Let's watch it again. Okay, so here's the helicopter comes into the frame. There is the object. Again, I overlaid it. Just blows past. I counted 24 frames for the object. It's basically 3/4 of a second. And then the helicopter took 3 seconds to get across the frame. So we don't know how far away it is, right? Based on the actual sizes. If we can go off other sizes of the object, right? It's around 40 feet. So that that is 40 feet. That's approximately 40 feet. It looks like it's, you know, at least twice as far away as the helicopter. This looks close to supersonic speed to me. Without the actual distance away, you can't tell how fast it's actually going, but very fast. It's definitely fighter speeds, if not higher. Looks like supersonic to me, with no sonic booms, right? No sound, no sonic booms. You see, we clearly hear the helicopter, right? When I go back to the actual tic-tac flyby, no sound. No sound at all.
Ron, we have ready for
So I apologize for sitting, I have an injury that's really starting to hurt right now. So far, what we've seen are objects that have no stabilizing fins, no visible means of propulsion, sometimes no visible shape, but are moving at incredible speeds and taking turns at incredible speeds. So it's not hard to think that this might not be our tech. These two videos together here are equally or even more incredible because this object comes out of the water trailing liquid behind it, which in some cases when objects move through the water, they don't seem to displace it. This one definitely displaces it, but that jet, that's a military jet, probably doing what, 300, 400, 500, 600 miles an hour. They have to slow this down so much, you'll see on the bottom right, it'll come out of the ocean, rotating, looks like a triangle, and then fly past the jet, which is barely moving because this thing is moving so fast. See, there was a little splash of water there. It's hard to see. We're going to zoom in on this. Bottom right. See there, we'll trail a little water. It's rotating. The jet is not moving at all, hardly. So the speed on this must be incredible. And you see it's tumbling. It looks like a silver triangle, but it's tumbling. Yeah, we saw something like this when we were about to do a speech. We couldn't record it because the sun was directly overhead. It was just burning my eyeball. So back up again and just see the water that is displaced when it comes out of the water. One when it comes out and another trails behind it. I know it's hard to see. I think we zoom in even more. But obviously it came out of the water, displacing the water. Good thing there's no swimmer over top of it. They would have said shark attack. There's another fast walker caught by a drone in Utah. There's two of them. That one was really fast. And then this one, maybe a little bit slower. But once again, hard to tell the shape of the object because it's moving so fast it just becomes a line. Yeah, if you've ever seen a jet fly overhead, they never, even though they can be going pretty fast, they never stretch out. You know, you always tell it's a jet. This thing is probably going at least twice as fast. Yeah, and the drones have 4K video, pretty good resolution, but here's another one. This has some analysis with it. This thing does bank and then comes toward the drone. See, it makes a turn there, almost like it notices the drone wants to do a flyby. And it looks more like a wedge or a saucer shape, but once again, moving so fast, it's very hard to tell. So they did some analysis.
Run the command line code, so we're going to begin parsing that, and that's going to spit out each of the individual frames. That's kind of performing a dissection, surgically pulling every single frame and determining how the pixels are behaving.
The software analyzes motion across each frame of video to create a visual map that will show any inconsistencies in the object's movement.
Now what's interesting to me is that this point where we can see the object traveling at a high rate of speed. This is essentially the last frame that we can see it. That object is blurred so far based on how fast it's moving, and these motion vectors are still predicting that it's traveling in this direction. There's a lot of detail in this that would be difficult to fabricate and fool the motion vectors into thinking that it's traveling in this direction. So if this video was faked, what would you expect to see? These vectors would be a little more sporadic. They wouldn't be so accurate. And I would say the slam dunk is that once the object is visually gone, there's still a bit of a motion trail.
And can we now rule out that this could have been doctored?
Based on the testing that I performed here, I would be confident in saying that this is an authentic of the events as they occurred.
This is just a strange object at 38 feet. Some people may say it's a balloon, some people may say it's not real, but it looks like a genuine video. It's just hard to tell what it is, but a very strange object. It could be moving with a jet stream, but if it's not, then it's moving under its own power. Film from an airplane. Yeah, it looks like a cube, but you know, you can't really tell. Unless the Borg have arrived. And definitely something that should be in commercial airspace. We like this one because it does show an ellipsoid, egg-shaped object like Socorro, but it seems like we're getting a lot of ellipsoids these days. This film from an airplane, a lot of times when you see this type of resolution, it's a plane. But when they zoom in, you can tell it's not a plane and there's a field around it. Seems to be pulsing a little bit. Ray Stanford, you know, is a friend of ours, and a lot of people have different opinions of Ray and what a lot of his stuff he kept promising and has not put out. Recently he went with Jeffrey Mishlove, who is a PhD, has some good stuff on YouTube. You can find all this on YouTube. But he sat down with Ray, and Ray started showing things that he'd only shown to Tony and I and some scientists and some aerospace engineers. And Ray has been in contact with aerospace engineers that are designing craft due to his beam ahead film, which we'll show you a little bit of. But we figured instead of talking about it, we'll just have Ray talk about this in his own words.
Definitely want to show Faraday rings, and we may want to show
pause a second.
visible magnetic field, I would think.
The previous slide is from a film. And Ray filmed at 37,000 feet from a, I believe, Braniff airflight. He's got all the details. 77, like you said. He's got the camera, he's got the angle, he's got the speed of the airplane. The pilot actually saw this and vectored away from it, but it looks like a cloud. But when Ray filmed this, objects were coming out of it and going back into it at very high speed. Then, as he took every frame, this is emulsion, 16 millimeters, so very hard to fake. He noticed they're Faraday rings. And Faraday rings are generated with immense, it takes a lot of power to generate one Faraday ring, much less two or more. There were, I think, 16 in this film. But this is on the end of the craft that's probably, 10 miles away from him, at least. We call it a grandmother ship.
Faraday rings, and we may want to show the visible magnetic field, I would think. And then I like to show where you can show the magnetic and gravitic and show that they're two distinct parameters. One has inertial lag, and it's the gravimeter, because it does have a sensor in it to detect gravity changes down to 1/1,000,000th of a G. I think it's important to point that out.
In the instrumented UFO research, which is what you advocate, you emphasize the magnetometer and the gravimeter. And each of these instruments is going to measure extremely weak fluctuations in either.
All small ones either way. It can detect extremely weak.
It needs to be able to detect extremely weak.
That's right.
for our viewers' benefit, can you define what a gravimeter is?
It measures and changes in local gravity. It can measure very extreme changes or very tiny changes down to 1/1,000,000th of what we normally tell. I mean, if our local gravity field changes even 1/1,000,000th of its value above that, it will detect that. And the interesting thing is about this machine is that it has internal to it a mask that is a sensor mask, as it's called, and it monitors the changes in the mass of that tiny mass. But the interesting thing about it is when you're using it in combination with the extreme low frequency magnetometer that's recording extreme low frequency magnetic waves, you can compare them in what's called an analog graph, just to chart with it, charting it out as waves, and up and down like that across time. And the fascinating thing is you can actually, during the events that we have recorded, you can look at the recording and see, for example, when an object made a visually almost instantaneous reversal of direction, you can see that there's a strong change in the extreme low frequency magnetism, and you can see the same kind of wave in G, or gravity. But what is fascinating is when you look at the graph, one charted in real time, one above the other, you will see that the change in gravity registered a tiny fraction of a second later than the magnetic. That's important because it absolutely proves that you're getting not an induction effect by the magnetometer, which is shielded against anyhow, but that in fact what you're getting is the evidence of the inertia of the sensor mass. Inertia is the tendency of a mass to stay in the condition of motion or lack of motion it is in. So in looking at the graph, one above the other, the gravimeter under the magnetometer, for example, the way we do it, you can actually see this tiny lag that is proof that it is actually a gravitational action on the sensor mass and not an induction effect of magnetism, which I said it couldn't be either way because the gravimeter system is shielded. But that's a really nice adjunct that you can actually, the physicists can just immediately look at and see, yeah, that's a real signal coming from the gravimeter. And of course, if gravity is changing locally in any appreciable way, it's not a normal thing. It's going to be an effect of the objects that we see, visible plasma patterns reacting to the magnetic field. But wonderfully so, and long before UFOs, there was a phenomenon discovered called Faraday rotation, in which the plane or polarization is rotated in the presence of a magnetic field. You can't see this with the naked eye, but with, for example, the movie camera that we've used on so many of these occasions, in the movie camera, you're looking to an eyepiece that is seeing one of the polarities of light, because when the light comes through the lens, it hits what's called a beam splitter, and one polarity of light is going to the eyepiece, the other polarity is going to the film. Perfect. Ideal. That way you can record scientifically, objectively, measurably, analytically. You can analyze the results of a film. It will produce, they produce rings due to Faraday rotation. You've seen them. I showed you some of the things from the movie films and the still pictures, wonderful pictures of this, which we'll be showing here. Your professor, Dr. Hyder, James Hyder, as he described, the bright bands are going to be brighter than the narrow bands. That's exactly the way they are. The absolutely mind-boggling thing is an example of why I'm advocating this now to every UFOlogy listening. It's what you can get that is just wonderful. Hyder mentioned that it takes a very strong magnetic field just to rotate, to produce one of these bands of light and dark. And he said, two would require magnetic fields so strong that we've only done it for very short periods in the laboratory. Well, the amazing thing is, in the context of what Dr. Harder said about even the difficulty of getting two of these ring sets, is that in that particular event, it generates a total of, as you counted, 14 of these rings. Imagine, if one requires about what we can easily do in the lab, and with difficulty for a short period we might generate 2 rings. What does it require to produce 14 rings?
As I recall, Harder testified to Congress in 1968 that to produce 3 rings would take over 1 million Gauss, and it's almost impossible to produce that in a laboratory.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Ray's footage is that he was, besides the government, the first to really use instruments to study the phenomena. The government, of course, had a lot of projects that, there's a lot of old stuff that most ufologists know about that keep coming up as if it's new. But they had put a lot of these devices out there to measure these things. We've never seen any of the results of that. But Ray had this in the 70s. And the thing about that one object he was just showing, it was reflected on, there was a cloud layer at 20,000 feet, and the shadow of the object was on that cloud layer at 20,000 feet. So you knew it to be a real object. And it seemed to have like a gas light under it to make it look like a cloud. So it definitely seemed to be disguising itself, but it was staying stationary. And then objects were coming off of it and going back and forth.
So one of the key findings that you came upon was that when you look closely at the photographs, you can see distortions in the air around the objects that you're photographing.
That's right. And you learn to recognize what even your instruments sometimes are giving you didn't realize. For example, the movie camera, most movie cameras ever used. You're seeing the objects, but you're not seeing to the same lens, in the same polarity of light as your film is, because there's a prism in there, call it a beam splitter, and it splits the beam and does I don't like the term anomalous here phenomenon, but an anomalous aerial object from an unknown source. And that strong magnetic field, when you get so many rings around as we have in some of these examples, you know you have an extremely powerful magnetic field. But there are also other ways that we film this, that it becomes visible by a different set of physical phenomena. And we can discuss that if you like.
Okay.
Okay. Well, here is the one that is, I think, will be a favorite to most anybody who's looking at this kind of evidence, whether even if they're not a scientist, because a layperson can see this too. A non-scientist can see this when you film this, and you can see it with the naked eye. You don't need polarized light to see this, but it's nice to have a good camera to record it. And it is the visible magnetic field. Now, the magnetic field is invisible, but on the other hand, these objects are, and I can show this in scientific evidence, they are themselves magneto-hydrodynamic, magneto-plasma-dynamic, if you prefer, craft. What they do, they electrify the air, hydrogen electrons, around them and move that with a magnetic field to their advantage. For example, they can electrify the air in a way in the direction they're going to, with the field effect, the magnetic field effect acting upon the plasma, the electrified air. They can move it around into a low pressure, and they can even bring it back in by a similar method, but it's a little different. I won't go into the technology of it, but they can compress it into a high pressure behind them, and a low pressure to very extremely low pressure in front of them, particularly when they project a column of this plasma, as we will talk about today, ahead of them. I mean, this is an incredible, a wonderful thing. But the thing is, you can see this magnetic field. You can see these electron emitting light as they're acted upon by this magnetic field. And they tend to, when the field becomes strong enough, they tend to spread off near the surface, away from the surface, and spread out and become swirling in the donut-shaped or torus-shaped magnetic field. And it's wonderful because I mean, it's so when you see it, you immediately think of what your grade school teacher showed you when you put a piece of paper over a magnet, a bar magnet, and then spread a bunch of iron filings out and shook the paper, and you then saw the shape of the magnetic field due to the iron filings. Well, the analog of the iron filings and what you're seeing in the sky is the plasma of the electrified atmosphere, which is glowing, acting in this donut-shaped thing. So that is how you can actually see the magnetic field that itself is invisible. You see it by
This was taken over God place
into this donut shape.
Now, back to the Braniff picture that you took. You're flying at 39,000 feet. If I recall correctly, you could see in that particular image both the toroidal magnetic forms that are there around the object and also the shadow of the object on the clouds below.
Yes, there are shadows on the cloud because there was a cloud there below. We were at 39,000 feet. I'm not sure the level of the cloud. I know that it was not any higher than 20,000 feet, so there was a nice long distance to protect from it. The one I showed you, there were numerous kinds of objects, by the way, that this granny, as I call it, was either, to use a Balayan term, possibly generating, but I think was probably launching. There were incredible numbers of types of UFOs, of which I have some remarkably detailed images, some of which you've seen. And yes, there are shadows on the cloud. The one that I will be aiding us to see here is important in this respect. The top, it was a discoid object that had another rather phallic-looking object docking in the magnetic vent, plugging in down the middle. It's where you actually have to dock because the plasma is swirling in the torus around it. You can't get into the swirling plasma and dock an object. You tear up what you're trying to dock with as well as the object is trying to dock. And I've got the film of this. Well, it's ordered with it's kind of edge on with the disc it's docking with. And above the top of it is going to be the most electrified air, the most plasma is going to be concentrated there, much more than below, because that's where it has to really grab the atmosphere and move it around it to create low pressure to keep it up there. And it's even adding the mass when the other object knocks to it. But fortunately, you can see I went back to wide angle for that, and you can see both sides of the aircraft window. And there's the streak of sunlight, and I do an overlay. I do an overlay showing the power rays, and see how from the top of where there's all this strong reflection above the disc object is occurring, you can actually follow down and see it beautifully projected on the cloud layer below. I mean, this is physics to the nth degree. I mean, it's enough to make any sincere physicist that wants to look at this just go wild with thrill, because it's
We'll jump back to the fact that you've also received credible UFO photographs from other researchers. For example, the famous UFO photographs from McMinnville, Oregon, and you've been able to apply the same analysis there. It's not just your own UFOs.
Mrs. Trent says, you came out and said all of a sudden its edge tilted up, which you begin to see the bottom of it. She said, and then a terrible, or some word I think began with a T, blast of air hit us. Well, that's very clear. The moment I saw that, I worked in a minute. And boy, and I just hit the contrast up just a little, and you've seen it. There's a beautiful flow down out of what would be the lower magnetic vent, and it comes down and it expands. And it comes inside and it hits the ground. And when this blast then hits the ground and bounces toward Mrs. Trent, and I think her husband too, if I remember correctly, you can see that. You can even see the evidence that hit the ground and the fact that on the downflow above, they're larger right before it would hit the ground. You actually see bubble patterns, disturbance patterns, which indicate a feedback where it hit the ground, and you've got shock phenomena coming back from where this high speed hit the ground. And it did have high speed, as you said, it was a powerful blast of air. And all you have to do, anybody can take the raw picture that I provide there and do it themselves on their home computer today, and maybe on their other iPhone. And you can see this blast for yourself. These are not aerodynamic objects. Let me underline that and put it in capital red italics. These are not aerodynamic objects. They are magnetoplasma dynamic objects. They do not fly. normally, they don't. They fly with their flat front dome side, not opposite the dome side, forward in the direction of travel. Their axis of radial symmetry pointing into the direction of travel. So it's anti-aerodynamic. That would give more resistance in any other direction if they were aerodynamic. But they have a structure on that bottom. The other side is the dome, and some pretty structures which you will see in the picture I'm going to let you use here for this presentation. But on the underside, there's a tower-like structure that generated this beam, this narrow beam of plasma ahead. And I'm going to say, well, how do you know it's plasma? You can see the solid structure, but it pulses off this solid tower, at the end of this tower, it pulses this narrow beam. Well, when you see the picture, even the black and white, I'm not black and white, the raw color picture unprocessed, you will be able to see that beam out there. But when it goes to just into more and more contrast, and then when I hit to where you can see those better, then we can see the tone gradients in blue with the sky and the beam out of bluish. When you go into false color depending on density, oh my God. I mean, physicists just go wild. What you see this plasma doing ahead of this object, this beam itself has pulses within the beam, which you can see the pulse fronts with different pulse waves along the beam.
So this final slide is an example of cameras are getting faster. I believe this takes 1,000 frames per second, but I looked into the cost of these things. Some of them are 7,000 frames per second. But if these things are flying around us at high speed, this is going to be a way that we can capture some of this phenomenon. And this gentleman tells you exactly how he did this. These videos all occur within 2 seconds. And you'll see some pretty strange things that I don't think are attributable to pollen or bugs or anything that's going to move this fast in 2 seconds.
I'm Joshua P. Warren, and I investigate mysteries for my... And 2 p.m., I pointed this camera straight up in the sky over the backyard of my house in Las Vegas, Nevada. To experiment, I shot over 2 dozen 2-second clips. With only one of them, I lucked out and captured strange objects moving overhead. Remember, everything you're about to see is happening in less than 2 seconds and the camera doesn't move. Now, as this shiny ball flies to the right, another object shoots out of it on the top left, right there. Don't worry, if you missed that, I'm going to play it again in a minute. But for now, just watch as this shiny ball continues traveling to the right, and then it suddenly makes an almost 90-degree turn and heads straight up. Now, can you imagine that happening in a split second? Okay, now let's replay that object that shot out of it. Watch for the arrow here, and you'll see, boom, right there it goes, all right? So I'm going to replay that again. Watch, it shoots sort of out of the top left of this main object, straight up into the sky. Incredible to think of how quickly that was going. Here it is again without the arrow. And then I'm going to let you continue watching that main object meander off to the right. Now, while all this was happening in the top right-hand corner of the screen, well, guess what? Toward the end of the video, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, an entirely different object goes zooming by at an incredible speed. I didn't even notice it at first because I was so fixated on the shiny ball. So this is what happens on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. You see that? Here's a closer view of that. So what is that? Okay, now one more time. It looks like an entirely different object. But think of how fast it is moving. And so now I'm just going to play the whole video for you from start to finish without any arrows or close-ups so you can analyze it. And remember, everything in this entire video is actually occurring in less than 2 seconds. It's possible I was only able
to see some of this stuff on camera at that time of day because it was reflecting the light of the sun. But these are not solar flares or reflections because everything was stable for that 2 seconds. If this was a still photo, I would have doubts, but this is high-speed photography. I think these UFOs or UAP may be zooming around us much more often than we think. We just need more people pointing high-speed cameras at the sky.
That's a good suggestion. So we hope you like that. Any questions? Pretty strange, you know. It gives you an idea that if you get a high-speed camera, start filming, see what you capture. Thanks, gentlemen, ladies.